Have you ever felt that really deep gut level reaction when something just feels unfair? That unsettling sense of injustice. Turns out it's way more than just an emotion. It's like a biological alarm system.
Absolutely. A hardwired alarm. And with AI reshaping everything, that alarm seems to be ringing louder, doesn't it? Especially around how businesses treat the people who, well, built them.
Exactly. That feeling you're talking about. It's not some soft preference, is it?
No, not at all. It's really a fundamental imperative. I mean, it's core to being human and honestly crucial if we want our societies to function properly.
Right. So today we're doing a deep dive into this incredible new analysis. It's called Human Fairness in the Age of AI, Business Honesty and Automation. We've pulled out some key excerpts, and it really waves together science, economics, even philosophy. It's quite something.
Yeah, it is. And our goal for you today is really to explore why fairness is just non-negotiable for us humans to cooperate. And maybe look at how our economic systems have historically kind of struggled with that.
And crucially, what steps, maybe bold steps, we can actually take to make sure this huge wave of technology, AI, really benefits everyone, doesn't just leave people behind.
Precisely.
Okay, let's start unpacking this. Why is fairness so fundamental? The sources call it an evolutionary puzzle. What's that about?
Well, what's fascinating here is that fairness, even when it makes us act against our immediate self-interest, right? It is the evolutionary trick that allows us to cooperate on a large scale.
How so?
It basically ensures that the rewards from working together get distributed, proportionally, based on the investment, the risk people took.
Okay.
And this capacity, it shows up as something called inequity aversion. The first type, the disadvantageous kind, is that really visceral negative reaction you get when you receive less than someone else for the same work.
Right. I think I know that feeling.
Oh, yeah. Franz de Waal's work with capuchin monkeys, it shows this powerfully. They'd literally throw a piece of cucumber back if their partner got a grape for doing the same task.
Wow. So it wasn't just wanting the grape.
Exactly. It was the unfairness of the distribution for the effort. And importantly, they don't react like that if you just give them rewards for free.
Right.
It highlights that link between fairness, effort, and deservedness.
Deservedness.
And then there's a second, maybe more sophisticated form, advantageous inequity aversion. That's rejecting a situation where you get more than a partner who deserves it equally.
So you turn down the better deal. Why?
It's like a anticipatory conflict resolution. It preserves those valuable cooperative relationships for the future. You don't want to sour a good partnership.
Makes sense.
And this, back in early human history, it kind of created a cooperation market. Fair-minded partners were favored for survival, for success, and selfish ones got punished.
So that feeling when loyal workers get tossed aside by a company.
It's not just emotional whining. It's that biological alarm screaming, broken cooperative relationship. It can even lead to aggression. Like in experiments where people actually pay money to punish someone who acted unfairly, that's costly punishment.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. This biological alarm system, what's actually firing in our brains when we face unfairness?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Neuroscience confirms we are basically hardwired for justice. When you put people in an fMRI scanner and show them unfair situations,
What happens?
you see heightened activity in the anterior insula. That's a brain region involved in things like anger, disgust, even physical pain.
Pain from unfairness.
It seems like it. And the more that area lights up when someone gets an unfair offer in, say, the ultimatum game, where you split money, the more likely they are to reject it, even if rejecting means they get absolutely nothing.
Wow. So getting nothing is better than accepting unfairness.
For many people's brains, yes. It suggests sensing injustice is just a basic, evolved thing.
And the flip side, when things are fair.
Well, then you see activation in the brain's reward circuitry, areas like the ventral striatum, the VMPFC, the same places that light up when you satisfy hunger or, win some money. Fairness itself feels good. It's a primary reward.
It's incredible.
And get this, it's partly heritable. A twin study using fMRI found that genetics accounted for something like 37–40% of the differences in how strongly people's anterior insula reacted to unfairness.
So my gut reaction is partly in my genes.
Seems that way. Which means accepting an unfair offer just to get something, that's actually a complex cognitive act. You have to actively use your prefrontal cortex to override that gut emotional response. Basically, swallow your pride.
Right.
So think about it. Economic systems that constantly force workers into accepting unfair conditions, stagnant wages, precarious jobs, they're forcing people into this neurologically taxing state. Constant emotional regulation.
And that contributes too.
Burnout, disengagement, poor mental health. It's the biological toll of living and working in a system perceived as unjust.
Okay, that really reframes the whole issue. So if our brains are wired this way, how do we even define fair in complex situations? What does it really mean for society?
That's crucial, and it's important here to maybe distinguish between a few terms: equality, equity, and justice. Equality is simple: treat everyone the same, like a clinic open to all. But that can be unfair if people start from vastly different places, right?
Yeah.
Equity acknowledges those different starting points. It provides tailored support so people can achieve fair outcomes, like offering alternative job application formats for someone with a disability.
Got it. And justice.
Justice is the bigger framework. It's about removing the systemic barriers in the first place so everyone has genuinely equal access and opportunity. Think John Rawls, the philosopher.
The veil of ignorance.
Exactly.
Okay.
And his difference principle. Inequalities are only really justified if they benefit everyone, especially the least advantaged members of society.
So how does this play out psychologically for individuals?
Well, being treated fairly sends a powerful signal. You're valued, you belong. Unfair treatment does the opposite. It says you're disposable, your contributions don't matter. It echoes that horrible sentiment you hear sometimes about companies treating long-term workers like, well, broken tools. And this connects to something called the fair process effect. It shows that how fair people perceive things to be isn't just about the outcome, the final decision. It's hugely influenced by the process.
How the decision was made.
Precisely. Procedural justice. If people feel they were respected, heard, genuinely considered, they're much more likely to trust and accept the decision, even if it's not the one they wanted.
Which is the opposite of
mass layoffs via impersonal emails, right? Those kinds of processes completely ignore this fundamental human need, and they breed resentment and deep distrust. It's counterproductive.
Does culture play a role in how we see fairness?
Absolutely. While the core drive seems universal, how it's expressed is definitely shaped by culture. For example, American workers often lean towards distributing bonuses based on individual contributions. That's equity. But workers in India might be more likely to use need-based norms.
Okay, so fairness is fundamental, biologically ingrained, crucial for cooperation. Why then does it seem so, well, systematically neglected in business? Especially now with AI shaking things up.
Yeah, it's a paradox, isn't it? A lot of the analysis points to the core architecture of modern corporations, specifically the principle of shareholder primacy.
Right, the idea that the company exists only to make money for its owners.
Pretty much. It gained huge legal traction after that 1919 case, Dodge v. Ford. The court basically said Henry Ford had to run the company mainly for the shareholders' financial benefit.
And Milton Friedman really pushed that later.
He did, in 1970, famously argued the one and only one social responsibility of business is increasing profits. Full stop.
But is that legally binding everywhere?
That's the nuance. It's often presented as ironclad law, but it's really more of a powerful social norm, a dominant ideology. The business judgment rule actually gives boards broad discretion, and many U.S. states have constituency statutes, allowing them to consider other stakeholders, employees, communities.
But the norm is powerful. Why?
Because shareholders vote for the board members, right? And executive pay is almost always tied heavily to stock performance. This creates huge incentives for short-term thinking, short-term gains. It creates a system where, effectively, only capital gets a vote.
Leading to those negative externalities you mentioned.
Exactly. Things like mass layoffs, environmental damage, costs that are pushed onto society while the financial benefits are concentrated. The source we looked at has a useful table comparing this shareholder model with a stakeholder model.
Where the goal is more about balancing everyone's interests.
Right. Balancing interests, employees, customers, community, and shareholders for long-term value creation with social responsibility as a core purpose, not just a PR strategy.
But surely there's a strong counterargument to just focusing on shareholders.
There is. And one compelling one is the new concession theory. It basically argues that corporations owe a duty back to society because they continuously rely on the state's laws and infrastructure to even exist.
How so?
Think about it. A modern corporation pooling vast amounts of capital, limited liability, None of that works without the government enforcing contracts, protecting property, providing courts, infrastructure, and educated workforce.
So it's a two-way street.
Exactly. This constant reliance creates a reciprocal duty to uphold the systems that allow the corporation to thrive. It reframes corporate social responsibility not as charity, but as a fundamental obligation.
That changes the perspective quite a bit.
It does, and it suggests the perceived conflict between profit and fairness is often, frankly, a false dichotomy. The real conflict is usually between short-term extractive profit and long-term sustainable value creation.
Because being fair actually pays off in the long run.
Often, yes. Ethical behavior, fair labor practices, community engagement, these things build trust, attract and retain talent, enhance reputation. They drive long-term financial success. A company that burns through its workforce for quick gains. It might look good for a quarter, but it sacrifices long-term stability and goodwill.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Now let's bring AI squarely into this picture. How is this technology making these existing tensions, this fairness issue, even more urgent? How is it magnifying things?
Well, what's really crucial to grasp is that AI isn't creating the unfairness problem, but boy, is it acting as a powerful, maybe unprecedented accelerant.
Accelerant? What kind of scale are we talking about?
The scale is staggering. The World Economic Forum, they forecast that by 2030, something like 92 million existing jobs could be displaced globally.
92 million.
Yeah. Now, they also forecast maybe 170 million new jobs being created. But even so, that implies a 22% structural disruption of the current job market. Huge churn.
And other organizations agree.
The OECD is looking at similar numbers. They estimate about 27–28% of current jobs are at high risk of automation, and they expect that pace to pick up as AI gets more capable.
It's not just jobs disappearing then.
No, it's also the skills needed for the remaining and new jobs. The WEF calls the skills gap the single biggest barrier for businesses transforming. They expect nearly 40% of core job skills to change by 2030.
40%.
Yep. Huge demand for advanced tech skills. AI, machine learning, big data, obviously, but also, interestingly, for uniquely human skills. Analytical thinking, creative thinking, resilience, leadership, social influence.
So it's a massive retraining challenge.
It's more than that. It's a massive, potentially forced occupational transition, a deep reskilling crisis, and that concern you mentioned earlier about experienced older workers being just cast aside. That's the human reality of this skills mismatch hitting hard.
That is sobering. And who's feeling this most acutely? Is this transition hitting everyone equally, it sounds like? Probably not.
No, you're right. The impacts are definitely not evenly distributed. They're quite disproportionate.
How so? Gender, for instance.
Yeah. Women are currently overrepresented in many jobs with high automation potential, things like admin, clerical support, customer service. One report found, I think, 10 women for every 7 men in roles with a 90% plus chance of automation.
Oh, wow.
But there's a potential positive twist, maybe. Women actually transitioned quite well during previous automation waves, like when PCs came in during the 80s. They moved into high-skill professional roles, partly because those roles placed a premium on social and collaborative skills where women often excel.
So there's hope, but also risk.
Exactly. There's still a persistent digital skills earnings gap around 41%. If we don't address that proactively, AI could actually widen the gender pay gap despite potential advantages in some areas.
What about age? You mentioned older workers.
Yeah, workers 50 and over are particularly vulnerable. Automation is hitting routine work hard, and ageism, especially in tech where the median age is often shockingly young, like late 20s, early 30s, it makes things incredibly difficult.
Re-entering the workforce must be almost impossible for some.
It can feel that way, but again, nuance. Studies show older workers are often very eager to learn new tech, and automations could actually allow them to use their deep experience in roles that are less physically demanding if employers make the investment in reskilling them.
And skill level itself, is it just low-skill jobs?
Not with AI. The first wave of computerization, yeah, that mostly hit low and middle skill routine tasks. But AI is different. It's what economists call a general-purpose technology. Meaning it can perform complex, non-routine cognitive tasks that used to be the exclusive domain of high-skill workers. Diagnosing diseases, writing software code, doing legal research. AI can do bits of all of that now.
So it's coming for the high-skill jobs, too.
It's impacting them, certainly. Changing them, augmenting them in some cases, replacing parts of them in others. It's a much broader disruption.
Okay, so if AI affects all skill levels, what does that do to wages? Is the gap between high and low earners going to shrink or get even wider?
That is a really, really critical question. And honestly, There's a pretty intense debate going on about it.
What are the arguments?
Well, on one side, some research suggests AI could actually reduce the wage gap. The idea is that if AI substitutes for some of those expensive, non-routine, high-skill tasks, it might shrink the skill premium, the extra money high-skill workers earn.
So AI as the great equalizer.
That's the optimistic take, yeah. It could boost the productivity of lower-skill workers relatively more.
But there's another side to that coin.
Oh, definitely. A big counter-argument is that the massive productivity gains and profits from AI, they're likely to be incredibly concentrated. Think about who owns the AI models, the data, the computing power.
The big tech companies, capital owners.
Exactly. So you could see unprecedented wealth concentration in the hands of capital owners, which might make the whole debate about relative wages less important than the debate about the share of the total economic pie going to labor versus capital.
Ah, a bigger shift.
Potentially. Plus, AI can also be highly complementary to certain high-skill tasks, strategic thinking, complex problem solving. So the people who can effectively leverage AI might see their wages soar, widening the gap even among the highly skilled.
And globally.
Yeah, it could worsen global inequality, too, if richer nations capture most of the benefits. So the core point here is that the really fundamental shift AI might bring isn't just about who earns what wage, but about the split between labor income and capital income.
Which brings us right back to ownership.
Precisely. Who owns the robots, metaphorically speaking?
Okay, this feels like a huge challenge. Systemic problems, from biology to corporate structure to AI's acceleration. So what are the solutions? How do we possibly build a future where tech progress is fair, where it benefits everyone?
Well, the analysis we looked at doesn't just diagnose the problem. It lays out a pretty bold, integrated blueprint for what a new social contract could look like. And it starts, interestingly, by redesigning the corporation itself.
Moving away from just shareholder value.
Exactly. Moving from narrow value extraction towards shared value creation. One really powerful tool discussed is profit-sharing plans.
How do those work generally?
Basically, companies distribute a set portion of their pre-tax profits to employees. It could be cash bonuses, or often it's contributions to retirement accounts, like a 401k. Companies usually have some discretion over the exact amount or formula.
Are companies actually doing this?
Oh, yeah. Delta Airlines is a famous example using profit thresholds. Buffer, the software company, has a neat hybrid formula using tenure, salary, and an equal split component.
And do they work? Do they make a difference?
The evidence suggests yes. They tend to boost motivation, productivity, loyalty, because employees have a direct financial stake in the company's success. It fosters that sense of ownership, reduces turnover, and it's tax deductible for the employers, too.
Okay, profit sharing. What else?
Another, perhaps even more transformative model is employee stock ownership plans, or ESOPs.
ESOPs, how are they different?
ESOPs are actually retirement plans structured as a trust. The trust holds company stock for the employees, who gradually accumulate ownership over time, usually at no personal cost to them. They're especially popular for private company owners looking for a way to exit or transition their business.
And there are benefits for the company, too.
Huge benefits. ESOPs are often financed with loans that the company repays using pre-tax profits. There are significant tax advantages for the selling owners, like deferring capital gains tax. And for the company, especially if it's structured as a 100% S-Corp ESOP, it can become effectively tax-exempt, which dramatically boosts cash flow for growth or debt repayment.
Wow. And the impact on performance.
Consistently positive. Study after study shows ESOP companies outperform their peers in sales growth, job growth, productivity. They're more resilient, too, about half as likely to go bankrupt. And the employee owners, they report higher job satisfaction and, on average, have more than double the retirement savings compared to workers in non-ESOP companies.
So these models, profit sharing, ESOPs, they directly tackle that ownership gap we talked about.
They absolutely do. By distributing the gains from automation, from productivity increases through profits and actual equity, they change the game. Workers aren't just labor inputs anymore. They become capital owners who benefit from the very technology they're helping to implement. It fundamentally shifts the answer to that question: who gets rich from innovation?
Okay, that addresses ownership, which is huge. But what about that other massive piece, the skills mismatch, the displacement? How do we handle that on a societal level?
You're right. Ownership is only part of the puzzle. Redesigning corporations needs to go hand in hand with a major society-wide commitment to investing in people, human capital.
Starting with companies themselves.
Yes. A key strategy is pushing for a corporate mandate for reskilling. It sounds counterintuitive maybe, but it's often more cost-effective for a company to retrain its existing employees than to fire them and then try to hire new people with the right skills in a tight market.
Plus, you keep the institutional knowledge.
Exactly. You preserve invaluable knowledge, you strengthen the culture. But these programs need to be done right. They have to be strategic based on what skills will actually be needed, customized, and linked to clear career progression. And you need a real culture of learning, genuine buy-in from employees.
Are there good examples of this working?
Definitely. IKEA retrained thousands of call center workers whose jobs were impacted by chatbots into new roles like interior design advisors. And that move apparently generated over $1 billion in new revenue. Amazon has its robotics apprenticeship. AT&T famously retrained over 100,000 people in software and data skills. Verizon made a big commitment too. It's doable.
But corporate programs won't catch everyone, right? Small businesses, contractors.
Absolutely not. That's where the public part comes in. A systemic problem needs a systemic solution. We need universal transition funds.
Like what exists now.
Sort of. The U.S. has the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, which is pretty broad. And then there's the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program, TAA.
Right, for workers displaced by foreign trade.
Yeah, and TAA is quite comprehensive. It offers extended income support, money for retraining, wage insurance if you take a lower-paying job, even help with healthcare costs.
So the proposal is?
Adapt that TAA model. Create a technology adjustment assistance program. The government would identify occupations genuinely at high risk from automation, and workers displaced from those jobs would become eligible for similar robust benefits. Income support so they can afford to retrain, funding for a quality education, job placement help, health insurance, a real safety net during transition.
That sounds substantial. What about the really big idea that always comes up in these discussions? Universal basic income, UBI.
Right. UBI, it's definitely part of the conversation. The idea, as you know, is a regular, unconditional cash payment to every citizen.
A way to share the wealth if AI decouples jobs from productivity.
That's one major argument for it, yes. And we actually have some interesting evidence from pilots around the world.
What have they shown?
Well, Finland's experiment with the unemployed didn't show a big jump in employment, but recipients reported significantly higher well-being, less stress, better health perception.
Okay. Any others?
GiveDirectly's long-term study in Kenya is fascinating. They saw no reduction in work effort, and the payments actually boosted savings, investment, people starting small businesses, plus better nutrition, mental health. Similar findings in India, small cash transfers led to more assets, more entrepreneurship, better health and sanitation.
Did people just stop working? That's always the fear.
The evidence largely says no. Even the older negative income tax experiments in the US and Canada back in the 60s and 70s only showed a moderate reduction in work hours, mostly among secondary earners and people choosing to go back to school. The money was mostly spent on basic needs.
So what's the verdict on UBI from the analysis?
It seems UBI is a potentially powerful tool for reducing poverty and boosting well-being, often without major negative impacts on work, sometimes even encouraging it. But the challenges are huge. The cost is immense. There's a real risk of inflation depending on how it's funded. And the political hurdles are, frankly, massive. So it's seen as a promising component, potentially, but not a silver bullet, especially for the skills mismatch issue.
Okay, so we have corporate redesign, reskilling mandates, transition funds, maybe UBI.
Right.
What about AI itself? How do we make sure the tech is developed and used fairly? And what's government's role in setting the rules?
Yeah, this is critical. Technology isn't destiny, right? Its impact is shaped by the rules, the ethics, the frameworks we build around it. Policy matters.
So what kind of auto policies?
One key idea is embedding human-centered AI, HCAI principles, right into the design process.
Human-centered AI.
It means shifting the focus, not just optimizing for efficiency or task completion, but actively prioritizing human needs, human values, human capabilities, aiming to augment human skills, not just replace them.
What does that look like in practice?
It means things like ensuring user empathy is central, building in ethical checks for fairness and bias, making the AI transparent and explainable, and critically, ensuring humans always retain meaningful control and oversight.
Examples.
In healthcare, maybe AI assists radiologists, but the human doctor makes the final call using their judgment. AI tutors could personalize learning, freeing up human teachers for mentoring and deeper interaction. Google claims to apply HCAI principles to products like photos or flights, focusing on user control and explaining why the AI is doing what it's doing.
So building fairness in, What about rules after it's built?
Yeah.
Regulations.
That's the next piece, legislating fairness. And here we see different approaches emerging globally.
Like the EU.
Exactly. The EU AI Act is probably the most comprehensive example. It takes a risk-based approach, and importantly, it classifies AI used in employment as high risk.
What does high risk mean in practice?
It means strict requirements, conformity assessments, ongoing risk management, using high-quality, unbiased data, ensuring human oversight. Crucially, it mandates informing and consulting worker representatives and gives workers' rights the right to be informed, to get an explanation, to challenge decisions, and there are hefty fines for non-compliance. It's proactive.
And the U.S. approach?
The U.S. federal approach so far has been more sector-specific and generally reactive. It focuses on using existing laws, anti-discrimination laws like Title VII, the ADA, labor laws like the NLRA, and saying, okay, employers, make sure your AI tools don't violate these existing laws.
So enforcement happens after someone complains?
Largely, yes. Through litigation after harm is alleged. It's more fragmented, relies on a liability model, though some states like California are proposing more proactive rules.
What's California considering?
Things like requiring written notice before using automated decision systems on employees or applicants, banning primary reliance on them for key decisions, mandating meaningful human review, banning certain high-risk practices like using AI for emotion recognition and hiring, and giving workers rights to access their data, correct it, and appeal decisions to a human.
So a real tension between the proactive EU model and the more reactive U.S. model.
Definitely. A key philosophical difference in approach, really.
Okay, one last major piece. Funding all this, the transition assistance, maybe UBI.
Yeah.
Where does the money come from?
The funding question. This leads to some bold ideas. One is the concept of a robot tax.
Taxing companies that use automation.
Essentially, yes, a tax specifically on companies deploying automation that significantly replaces human labor. The idea is partly to generate revenue, maybe to fund that technology adjustment assistance or UBI, and partly to slightly disincentivize automation that only displaces workers without creating broader value. It forces companies to internalize some of the social cost.
Controversial, I imagine.
Very, but it's being seriously discussed. And closely related is the idea of using that revenue or other revenues generated by AI's productivity boom to create social wealth funds.
Social wealth funds, like Norway's oil fund.
Exactly like that model, a collectively owned investment fund where the returns are used for public benefit. This reframes the enormous wealth generated by AI, which, remember, is built on collective human knowledge, language, data, not as purely private profit, but as a new form of collective wealth, a digital dividend.
A dividend paid back to society.
Precisely. It's a systemic way to ensure that the rewards generated by this collective technological achievement are shared, invested back into the public good, funding the very transitions it necessitates.
Wow, okay. So pulling all this together,
Yeah.
What's the big takeaway here? Where does this leave us?
Well, I think the unavoidable conclusion from this deep dive is that the path we're currently on, where the tech innovation just races ahead and the social innovation lags way behind, it's just not sustainable. That feeling of injustice so many people have, it's not irrational. It's a logical, even biological response to a system that feels dangerously out of balance. And AI is cranking up the volume on that imbalance.
Yeah, it really feels that way.
But the crucial point, I think, is that the future isn't written yet. We're at this really pivotal moment. We have a genuine opportunity to consciously, deliberately choose to optimize our systems, not just for raw efficiency, but for justice, for shared prosperity.
And the blueprint is there, isn't it, as we've walked through? Redesigning corporations, profit sharing, ESOPs so workers become owners, investing massively in people, corporate reskilling, universal transition funds like tech adjustment assistance, maybe UBI as a floor.
Exactly. And then wrapping it all in smart public policy. Human-centered AI by design. Strong regulations, maybe more like the EU's proactive model, to protect rights and ensure accountability. And these bold funding ideas, the robot tax, social wealth funds, to treat AI's bounty as a collective dividend.
It really reframes innovation, doesn't it? It doesn't have to be this zero-sum game.
Absolutely not. Think about the great innovations, the light bulb, the computer, the smartphone. None were solo acts. They all built on generations of collective knowledge, public investment, shared infrastructure.
And AI is the same.
Fundamentally, it's trained on our collective language, our data, our images, our ideas. It's a product of all of us. So the really big question we leave you with is, what kind of society do you want to build now? One where this immense technological power is finally matched by an equally immense commitment to human dignity, to fairness, to ensuring everyone shares in the prosperity we create together. It's really something to mull over.
This is DigitView.